So I want you to imagine that you are a common soldier.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, exactly. You come from absolute poverty. I mean, you have no aristocratic blood, no vast inherited wealth, and virtually no formal education.
Right, starting from the absolute bottom.
Exactly. But you look around at your country, which is this ancient, staggering empire that is quite literally being carved up by foreign powers. And you simply decide, you know what? I'm going to become the king.
It sounds like the plot of a fantasy novel, honestly. Or maybe some ruthless corporate thriller.
I know, right? But you don't ask for a promotion. You don't mount a political campaign. You violently fire the old royal family, put the crown on your own head, and proceed to drag an entire nation into the 20th century.
But the wild thing is, it is entirely real. I mean, it is the historical reality of a man who willed a monarchy into existence through sheer, unadulterated force.
Exactly. And welcome to our deep dive. Today, we have pulled together an incredible stack of sources to reverse engineer this wild story.
We really have. We are looking at declassified CIA and MI6 memos, massive historical encyclopedias covering the Khmer and Pahlavi dynasties, and several modern geopolitical analyses as well.
Right. And our mission today is to unpack the 54-year roller coaster of the Pahlavi dynasty. We are going to explore the central historical tension of this royal house.
Which is really a three-part tension, right?
Yeah, exactly. How they seized absolute power from absolutely nothing, the extreme lengths they went to in order to maintain their legitimacy, and then the internal contradictions that ultimately caused their spectacular, world-altering decline.
And we're going to look at this through two distinct lenses today. I will be focusing on the family dynamics and the deep cultural symbolism.
That is your bread and butter.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to look at the Pahlavis' desperate quest for a legitimate bloodline, the way they tried to legally and historically justify their existence, and the immense psychological weight of sitting on the famed peacock throne.
And I'll be examining the political machinery and the institutions. You know, the brutal, brilliant, and deeply flawed reforms that built the modern state of Iran.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. But if you're listening to this right now and wondering why you should care about a dynasty that fell decades ago, the answer is pretty simple. Understanding the Pahlavis is the ultimate masterclass in the dangers of top-down modernization.
Oh, 100%.
It is a profound lesson on how trying to change a nation's identity overnight, just by decree, can backfire in ways that literally reshape global history.
Yeah, you can't just mandate a new reality.
No. You can't. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the climax, we have to start in the dirt. The year is 1878, and we are in a small mountainous village called Alasht in the Mazandaran province.
Right, which was part of what was then known to the West as Qajar Persia.
Exactly. And this is where Reza Khan is born.
And to understand his later, almost fanatical obsession with national identity and borders, you really have to look at his parents.
Tell me about them, because the sources highlight them heavily.
Well, his mother was a Muslim immigrant from Georgia. Her family was essentially forced south into mainland Qajar, Iran, after the Russian Empire aggressively swallowed up territories in the Caucasus.
Following the Russo-Persian Wars.
Exactly. So on his mother's side, he literally carries the trauma of a shrinking, defeated empire. He grew up with that narrative.
Right. His father.
His father was a Mazandarani military major commissioned in a local regiment. But tragedy strikes immediately. His father dies when Reza is just an infant.
So he is essentially an orphan raised by his uncle in Tehran. And this uncle is an officer in the Persian Cossack Brigade.
Which is such a weird historical quirk.
It really is. Now, for anyone listening who isn't familiar with 19th century military structures, the Persian Cossack Brigade is a fascinating and honestly somewhat humiliating institution.
Yeah, humiliating is the right word.
It was a cavalry unit formed by the ruling Qajar dynasty, made up of Persian soldiers, but entirely commanded by Russian officers.
Right. It was literally modeled after the Russian Cossacks.
Yes. So, young Reza formally joins this brigade when he is just 15 years old. I mean, his entire worldview is forged in barracks, where his own people are taking orders from a foreign power.
That daily humiliation of foreign domination, it's just the defining feature of his youth. And by the time we get to the early 20th century, the ruling Qajar dynasty is extraordinarily weak.
They were barely holding on.
Right. To fund their lavish European trips and maintain a basic semblance of a state, the Qajars had been selling off their country piece by piece.
Concessions, right.
Exactly. They granted monopolistic concessions to foreign investors, selling the exclusive rights to Iranian tobacco, telegraphs, and eventually oil.
And by the time World War I rolls around, the situation is completely untenable. I mean, Persia officially declares neutrality, but nobody cares.
No, it becomes a battleground anyway.
Yeah, if you look at the maps from our geopolitical sources, it's shocking. You have a Russian sphere of influence in the north, essentially treating it as a vassal state, and a British sphere in the south, desperately trying to protect the newly discovered oil fields.
The country is completely fractured into tribal and regional loyalties. The central government in Tehran has almost no authority outside the city walls.
It's an absolute political vacuum. Bolshevik Russian troops are actively supporting separatist, communist movements in the northern provinces. The British are manipulating tribal leaders in the south.
It's chaos.
Utter chaos.
Oh.
And into this utter chaos steps Reza Khan. By 1921, he has fought his way up the ranks to become a formidable brigadier general.
And this is where the geopolitical shift really opens a door for him.
How so?
Well, the Russians, dealing with the aftermath of their own communist revolution, are preparing to pull back their officers from the Cossack Brigade.
Ah, right. So there's a leadership vacuum right in front of him.
Exactly. Reza sees his moment. He leads a revolt from within, purging the Persian Cossack Brigade of all its remaining Russian commanders. And then he turns his eyes to the capital.
This is the turning point. In February 1921, Reza leads a detachment of somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 Cossack troops right into Tehran.
And he does this with the tacit, if not explicit, backing of British General Edmund Ironside, right?
Yes. Ironside wants a strong man to secure the capital against Bolshevik influence, so he essentially lets it happen.
It's basically a bloodless march. He faces virtually no resistance.
Right. He seizes control of the police stations, the telegraph offices, the strategic points, and overthrows the existing ineffective ministry. But notice the calculated, step-by-step institutional ascent here.
He doesn't just declare himself king.
Exactly. If I'm a military strongman who just took the capital, the temptation is to declare myself supreme ruler on day one.
Yeah.
But Reza is incredibly methodical.
Very patient.
First, he props up an idealistic civilian reformer named Said Zia od-Din Tabatabai to act as prime minister. Reza just takes the title of Minister of War.
It's a brilliant tactical move. He lets the civilian politician take all the political heat while he controls the guns.
Exactly. And as Minister of War, what does he do? He initiates this massive, self-sustaining feedback loop of power.
Like a machine.
Yeah. He starts collecting emergency taxes from the provinces to build up and equip his new national army. He then uses that newly equipped army to crush regional warlords and tribal rebellions.
Which then gives him more power.
Right. Defeating those warlords gives him control of more territory, which allows him to collect even more taxes, which builds the army further. He is systematically monopolizing violence and revenue.
And as he does this, he becomes the indispensable man. Meanwhile, the young Qajar ruler, Ahmad Shah, is practically a ghost.
Yeah, he's barely even in the country.
Right, he's spending most of his time in Europe, ostensibly for his health, leaving Reza Khan to basically run the entire country. So by 1923, Reza forces the issue.
He demands the premiership.
Exactly. He demands the position of prime minister. Ahmad Shah capitulates and leaves for Europe, essentially going into permanent exile.
And then comes the final legal blow. In October 1925, he has the Majlis, the Persian parliament, formally vote to depose the Qajar dynasty.
Just completely wipe them out legally.
Yes. Now, I want to highlight something incredible from the historical records here. Out of the entire parliament, there are only 5 dissenting votes against giving Reza absolute power.
Just 5 guys willing to stand up.
Yeah, and one of those 5 men who stands up and argues that giving a military commander the throne violates the Constitution is a politician named Mohammad Reza.
Oh, wow.
Keep that name in your head, because the man who tries to legally prevent the dynasty from being born is going to play a massive role in almost destroying it 28 years later.
It is a remarkable historical thread, just how small the political world is there. But despite Mosaddegh's objections, in December 1925, the Majlis votes to make Reza the new Shah.
He finally gets the crown.
He does. And this is where the cultural symbolism becomes paramount. What's fascinating here is how he builds his new identity. In 1925, a law is passed requiring all Persians to adopt a formal last name and register with newly created civil authorities.
Right, because before that, people just used titles or tribal affiliations.
Exactly. Now, Reza's father's clan was historically known as Pahlavan, but Reza actively chooses and patents the name Pahlavi.
I looked at this name change, and to me, Pahlavi doesn't sound like a standard political rebrand. It sounds ancient. Was he specifically targeting a certain era of history with that word?
Oh, he absolutely was. Pahlavi references the Middle Persian language, the language spoken during the Sasanian Empire, which ruled from the 3rd to the 7th century, long before the Arab Islamic conquests brought Islam to Iran.
So he's reaching way back.
Very far back. The word itself translates to heroic, glorious, or warrior. By taking this name, Reza was making a profound statement.
Which was what?
He was deliberately bypassing 1,000 years of Islamic and Qajar history. He was drawing a direct mythological line connecting himself to the ancient Achaemenid and Sasanian emperors. He was telling his people and the world, I am not a usurper who took this by force. I am the legitimate restoration of ancient Persian glory.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on the romance of that a little bit.
Fair enough, go ahead.
I look at Reza Khan's trajectory, and I see a purely opportunistic, power-hungry tactician, not a romantic historian.
You think it was just a cynical ploy?
Yes. I mean, we know from the political records that he originally didn't even want to be a king. He looked right next door at Turkey, where Mustafa Kemal Ataturk had just abolished the Ottoman Sultanate and established a secular republic.
That is true. He did admire Ataturk.
Right. Reza wanted to do the exact same thing in Iran. He wanted to be the secular president of a new republic. The only reason he took the crown and established a royal dynasty is because the powerful Shia clerics in Iran fiercely opposed a republic, fearing it would lead to aggressive Turkish-style secularism.
So you're saying the monarchy was a compromise?
Exactly. He took the throne because it was the path of least resistance to absolute power. The ancient Persian branding was just his plan B.
Well, I respectfully disagree with the premise that the branding was merely a pragmatic plan B. Pragmatic, absolutely. He navigated the political realities of the Shia clergy to get the top job. But his obsession with ancient Persian symbolism, which he ruthlessly maintained for the rest of his life, shows a genuine ideology.
You think he actually believed it?
I do. He looked at a country fractured into localized, tribal, and religious factions, and he deeply believed that the only way to save Iran from being permanently partitioned by the British and the Soviets was to forge a unified mythological national identity.
Sort of a shared delusion to hold the country together.
Exactly. The Qajar dynasty had left the country in pieces. Reza believed a powerful, ancient, pre-Islamic narrative was the only glue strong enough to hold the modern nation together.
Well, I'll give you that the branding was effective, but the way he executed it feels like a hostile corporate takeover.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Imagine a ruthless new CEO buys out a failing 150-year-old legacy company. He doesn't just fire the old board of directors, the Qajars. He completely changes the name of the company, redesigns the logo, and puts out a press release pretending the last 1,000 years of management simply never existed.
He rebrands the entire enterprise to fit his specific vision of the future.
Exactly.
And once he has the title of CEO, or in this case, Shah of Iran, he has to build the infrastructure to support that massive rebrand. He has to maintain the legitimacy he just invented.
Which brings us to the actual execution of his power. This is modernization at gunpoint.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Reza Shah initiates a series of radical, sweeping reforms to physically drag the country together. The most famous is the Trans-Iranian Railway.
Which is a massive undertaking.
Huge. This wasn't just laying some tracks. It was a monumental engineering feat connecting the Caspian Sea in the north to the Persian Gulf in the south, cutting right through the massive Zagros Mountains.
And didn't he fund it internally?
Yes, and that's crucial. To avoid being indebted to foreign powers, he funded it almost entirely through heavy domestic taxes on everyday items like tea and sugar.
Wow, so the common people really paid for it.
They paid for all of it. He also implements secular civil codes, completely sidestepping the traditional religious courts that had governed daily life for centuries.
He creates the National Bank of Iran to manage the country's finances, breaking the reliance on British and Russian banks.
But if you want to talk about raw mechanics, look at the 2-year universal military draft he imposed almost immediately in 1926.
Right, the draft.
If you're listening to this, you might think a draft is just about defending borders. But in 1920s Iran, the draft was a massive engine for social engineering.
How so?
Well, how do you create an Iranian when most people identify only with their local tribe or village?
Ah, I see. You mix them up.
Yes, you take a young man from a Kurdish village in the west, and a young man from a Baluch tribe in the east, and a young man from Tehran, and you mix them together in a barracks.
That makes total sense.
You force them to learn basic literacy, and critically, you force them to speak a standardized language, Persian or Farsi.
Yeah.
You are physically dismantling tribal loyalties and replacing them with loyalty to the central state, and specifically to the Shah.
It's centralization through the military apparatus. It's incredibly effective.
Extremely. He is also aggressively attacking foreign influence to prove his nationalist credentials. In 1928, he unilaterally ends foreign capitulations.
We should probably clarify what that means because it's a massive geopolitical shockwave at the time.
Right. Extraterritoriality or capitulations basically meant that foreign citizens had legal immunity.
Wow, complete immunity.
Pretty much. If a British citizen committed a crime in Tehran, the Iranian police couldn't touch him. He had to be tried by a British consul. It was deeply humiliating for Iranian sovereignty.
So what did Reza Shah do?
He simply tears those agreements up. Done. Then, in 1931, he takes on the Anglo-Persian Oil Company.
The big one.
Yeah. The British were extracting massive amounts of Iranian oil and paying Iran a tiny, insulting fraction of the profits. Reza Shah cancels the concession and renegotiates a deal that secures a slightly larger, though still unequal, share for Iran.
But while he's flexing his muscles internationally, the way he enforces this new national identity on the street level is incredibly heavy-handed.
Oh, it's tyrannical.
It was a literal war on aesthetics. Reza Shah recognized that you can't just change the laws, you have to change how the nation looks and feels.
Right.
If you wanted a modern, unified nation, the people had to look modern and unified. So in 1928, the Majlis passes the Uniform Dress Law.
Which did what?
This forced all Iranian men, regardless of their tribal or regional customs, to abandon traditional clothing in favor of Western-style suits and a specific European-style cap known as the Pahlavi hat.
And then in 1936, he goes to the absolute extreme. He officially bans the veil, the chador for women.
Yes. He orders local police to literally tear the chadors off women's heads in the streets.
That is just horrifying to think about.
The psychological trauma of that mandate cannot be overstated. For traditional, deeply religious women in rural areas and conservative cities, the veil wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a fundamental part of their modesty and identity.
Yeah.
Being forced into the public street without it was tantamount to being forced out naked. Many women chose to stay locked inside their home for years rather than face the humiliation of the police tearing off their garments.
That is just incredible. But to the Shah, this was a necessary visual rebranding. He freely allowed news photographers to take pictures of him drinking beer and wine in public, a direct, intentional affront to strict Islamic tradition.
Right, trying to force secularism.
Conversely, he strictly forbade the photographing of traditional Persian elements like camels in the desert or women wearing traditional clothing.
Yeah.
He wanted to project to the West and to his own people an image of a completely secular European-style nation.
And this rebranding extends to the very name of the country on the global stage. In 1935, he officially sends a memo to the League of Nations and foreign embassies demanding they stop calling the country Persia.
Which was a big deal.
Huge. Persia was a term used by Westerners since the ancient Greeks, derived from just one specific province, Fars. He mandates the use of the native historical name Iran, which literally translates to land of the Aryans.
It ties perfectly into that pre-Islamic mythological narrative we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
But you cannot simply bully a deeply traditional religious society into modernity without extreme blowback.
Right.
He built a modern state structure, railways, secular courts, a national bank, but he built it on a foundation of absolute autocracy.
Right.
And when people pushed back against that structure, they were met with lethal force. Here's where it gets really interesting, or rather, really dark.
Yeah, the most tragic and visceral example of this is the 1936 massacre at the shrine of Imam Reza in the city of Mashhad.
Set the scene for us.
This shrine is one of the holiest sites in Shia Islam. Thousands of traditionalists and clerics had gathered there to peacefully protest against the Shah's radical secular policies, particularly the new dress codes and the rumored ban on the veil.
And what is the mechanism of the Shah's response? He doesn't negotiate. He doesn't send in police with batons.
No, he doesn't.
He sends in the military. They set up machine guns and open fire on the protesters inside the sacred shrine complex.
Inside the shrine itself.
Yes. Dozens of people are killed. Hundreds are injured. The message was crystal clear. Opposition to the Shah's modernization project will be met with state-sanctioned murder.
He executed tribal leaders who resisted his centralization. He forced nomadic tribes who had migrated with the seasons for millennia to settle in permanent locations, fundamentally destroying their economic and cultural way of life.
And while he is forcing this painful modernization on the peasantry, we have to look at the economic reality behind the curtain.
Which is pretty stark.
Very. As he is taxing sugar to build railways, Reza Shah is simultaneously accumulating massive personal wealth.
Right, the land grabs.
He uses his absolute power to systematically confiscate and acquire vast estates, particularly in his home province of Mazandaran, until he becomes the single largest landowner in all of Iran.
So you have a newly emerging urban middle class who benefits from his secular schools and industries, sure.
Right.
But the vast majority of rural farmers are seeing stagnant living standards, while the man demanding they abandon their culture is sitting on estates the size of small European countries.
He alienates everyone. He alienates the religious conservatives with his secularism and violence at Mashhad. He alienates the secular leftists and intellectuals with his censorship, his hoarding of wealth, and his jailing of progressive political figures.
He's on an island.
He is. But here's the massive twist in the narrative. Despite all of this internal tension, despite the fact that he had made enemies of almost every demographic in his own country, it isn't a domestic uprising that takes Reza Shah down.
Right, it's a massive geopolitical miscalculation.
Walk us through that.
We have to look at the global map as the 1930s draw to a close. Reza Shah, in his relentless drive to modernize Iran and displace the lingering influence of the British and the Soviets, looks for a new partner.
And he chooses poorly.
Very. He turns to Nazi Germany. By the outbreak of World War II, Germany has become Iran's leading trading partner. German engineers, technicians, and investors are heavily involved in building Iranian infrastructure.
Now, let's be clear about motives. Our sources indicate that Reza Shah was reportedly quite flattered by Nazi racial theories regarding the Aryan origins of the Iranian people. Remember the 1935 name change?
Yes, that ideological alignment was there.
But fundamentally, his alignment with Germany was a strategic mechanic. It was a classic geopolitical play. Use a rising third power to counterbalance the two empires that have historically bullied you.
The problem is, when World War II kicks into high gear, the map changes. Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union. Suddenly, the British and the Soviets are allies.
Right, they're on the same team now.
And they look at Iran and see a massive problem. You have thousands of German agents and engineers in a country that shares a massive northern border with the Soviet Union and sits right next door to the British crown jewel of India in the east, not to mention the vital oil reserves in the south.
For the Allies, it is an entirely unacceptable strategic risk. They demand the Shah expel the Germans.
And he refuses, right?
Yes, citing his neutrality.
Yeah.
So in August 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union launch a coordinated, massive military invasion of Iran.
Wow.
And this is the ultimate humiliation for Reza Shah. The modern Iranian army, the very institution he had spent 2 decades and millions of tax dollars building to protect Iranian sovereignty, collapses in a matter of days.
It just folds.
Completely. The Allies occupy the country to secure the Persian corridor, a vital supply line to ship American and British weapons up through Iran to the Soviet Red Army fighting the Nazis.
And to ensure that supply line is secured, they force Reza Shah to abdicate the throne.
Just like that, it's over for him.
The self-made king, the soldier who willed himself onto the peacock throne, is removed by the very foreign powers he spent his life trying to outmaneuver.
It's almost poetic. He's placed on a British ship and sent into exile, first to the island of Mauritius and eventually to Johannesburg, South Africa, where he dies just a few years later in 1944.
A lonely end for a force of nature.
Very. But the Allies don't abolish the monarchy. They need stability.
Right, they can't just leave a vacuum.
So they decide to preserve the Pahlavi dynasty. They take Reza Shah's eldest son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and place him on the throne.
And this transition fundamentally alters the DNA of the dynasty. Mohammad Reza is only 21 years old.
So young.
He has been educated in an elite boarding school in Switzerland. He speaks fluent French. He is sophisticated, but he is completely untested.
The psychological and symbolic shift here is monumental, and it haunts the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
Reza Shah was a physically imposing, battle-hardened military commander who seized the throne through the sheer force of his own will. His son, Mohammad Reza, did not win his throne. He was handed it by foreign occupying armies.
Exactly. If you are the new Shah, how do you look your generals in the eye? How do you project the aura of the ancient King of Kings when absolutely everyone in the room knows the British and the Soviets put you in the chair?
You start your reign with a massive deficit of legitimacy.
Yes, and this deep-seated insecurity is blown wide open just a decade later, leading to the defining crisis of his early reign, and arguably the turning point of modern Middle Eastern history, the events of 1953.
Right, and to understand how we get to 1953, we have to look at the post-war political landscape in Iran. Once the war ends and the Allies eventually leave, the heavy-handed, suffocating autocracy of Reza Shah is gone.
It's a totally different vibe.
In its place, a much more pluralistic, chaotic, and democratic political environment emerges. The Majlis, the parliament, actually has real power again. The press is relatively free.
And into this democratic opening steps a deeply popular, fiercely nationalist figure, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh.
Wait, this is the same Mossadegh?
Yes. This is the exact same Mossadegh who, back in 1925, stood up in parliament and voted against making Reza Khan the Shah.
That is wild.
Now, in the early 1950s, he is the prime minister, and he makes a monumental move that shakes the globe.
He goes after the oil.
He focuses on the lifeblood of the Iranian economy, oil. Since the early 1900s, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, or AIOC, which later becomes BP, had controlled Iran's oil fields.
And the conditions were terrible, right?
Abysmal. The conditions for Iranian workers in the massive refinery city of Abadan were horrific, while the profits flowing back to London were astronomical.
The mechanics of the deal were incredibly skewed. Mossadegh and his nationalist coalition in the Majlis pass a law to fully nationalize the Iranian oil industry. They essentially seize the assets of the AIOC, arguing that the oil belongs to the sovereign people of Iran, not a British corporation.
Now, based on the historical facts detailed in our sources, and we're just reporting the history here, this move leads to a severe international crisis.
Oh, absolutely. The British government is completely outraged by the loss of their most valuable overseas asset.
And they respond with a crippling global blockade. They threaten to sue any tanker that buys Iranian oil, and they freeze Iranian assets. The embargo devastates the Iranian economy, inflation skyrockets, and political instability mounts.
As the economic situation deteriorates, the political friction between the popular Prime Minister Mossadegh and the insecure young Shah reaches a boiling point. The British, unable to resolve the issue militarily or legally, turn to the United States.
And this is where things get really covert.
Right. Now, our sources are very clear on the mechanics of what happens next. The intelligence services of the United States and Great Britain, the CIA and MI6, coordinate a covert operation known as Operation Ajax to remove Prime Minister Mossadegh from power.
We want to be clear that we're just outlining the facts from the historical records, not taking sides on Cold War politics here.
Right, absolutely. The operation involves spending millions of dollars to bribe Iranian politicians, military officers, and local gang leaders to foment chaos in the streets of Tehran.
And they have to get the Shah on board.
They do. They convince the Shah, who is initially very hesitant, to sign royal decrees officially dismissing Mossadegh and replacing him with a pro-Western military officer, General Fazlollah Zahedi.
So in August 1953, the coup is initiated, but the initial attempt actually fails, right?
It does. Mossadegh's loyalists arrest the coup plotters. And during this initial chaos, what does the Shah do?
He runs.
He panics. He boards a private plane and flees the country, flying first to Baghdad and then on to Rome.
But the CIA and MI6 operatives on the ground, alongside Iranian military elements loyal to the monarchy, they regroup. Days later, they successfully mobilize pro-Shah military units and pay demonstrators to overwhelm Mossadegh's defenses. Mossadegh is arrested, his government is overthrown, and the oil dispute is eventually settled with a new consortium that heavily favors Western companies.
And the Shah, who was sitting in a hotel in Rome thinking he had lost his dynasty, gets a telegram telling him it's safe to come home.
Wow.
He returns to Tehran and is restored to absolute power. But if you were listening to this and analyzing the politics, think about the catastrophic damage this does to his legitimacy.
It's devastating.
It permanently brands him.
Exactly. This raises an important question, perhaps the most agonizing question of Mohammad Reza's entire life. If he felt insecure about being installed by the Allies in 1941, what does it do to a monarch's soul and his public standing when he literally flees his own country in fear, only to have his throne handed back to him a second time by American and British intelligence agencies?
Right. He knows he didn't earn it.
It permanently brands him in the eyes of many Iranians.
From an institutional perspective, the 1953 coup destroys the vibrant, pluralistic period of Iranian politics. Because the Shah knows he doesn't have the organic democratic support of the street, he realizes he can only rely on one thing to maintain control:
Force.
intense, uncompromising authoritarianism. This is the era where the SIAC is created.
Ah, the secret police.
The SIAC was the state intelligence and security organization, heavily trained initially by the CIA and Israeli Mossad. It becomes the most feared institution in the country, notorious for surveillance, censorship, and the brutal torture of political dissidents.
So he fundamentally fractures his political legitimacy.
Yes. The secular leftists, the university students, the nationalists, they view him not as a sovereign Iranian king, but as a puppet, a kind of the West maintained by secret police.
And he knows this.
He does. Because the Shah was just saved by the CIA, he knows the street doesn't love him. He has to buy that love back. So he looks at the massive hoarded estates his father accumulated and decides he has to change the narrative.
Which brings us to the Shah's grand attempt to legitimize his rule through progress. The White Revolution, the desperate need for an heir, and the ultimate historical party.
Walk us through the White Revolution.
Well, in 1963, the Shah launches the White Revolution. He calls it white to contrast it with the red revolutions of the communists.
A clever bit of branding.
Very. It is a massive top-down program of social and economic reform designed to rapidly modernize the country and improve living standards, thereby justifying his autocratic rule.
And land reform was a big part of that, right?
The cornerstone of this revolution is sweeping land reform. The government essentially forces wealthy landlords and the crown itself to sell off massive agricultural estates, which are then broken up and sold at a discount to millions of peasant farmers.
It's designed to break the power of traditional rural elites and create a loyal base of property-owning farmers.
Exactly. He also pushes through progressive social reforms. He grants women the right to vote and run for parliament. He creates the Literacy Corps, drafting young educated men and women to go into remote villages to teach children how to read.
That sounds incredibly progressive.
It was, and he pours billions of dollars of newly negotiated oil wealth into national infrastructure, building dams, highways, and steel mills. And for a time, it works, economically speaking. Iran's growth rates in the 1960s and early 70s are astronomical. A vibrant new urban middle class emerges.
But the duality of the White Revolution is stark.
Oh, very much so.
The wealth gap widens significantly. The new wealth is highly concentrated in Tehran and among the elite connected to the royal court, while many rural farmers, who lack the equipment to farm their new small plots of land, end up migrating to the cities and living in sprawling slums.
And crucially, the regime uses this narrative of rapid social progress to mask intense political repression.
Right. You could have a great job in a new petrochemical factory, you could go to a modern university, and you could live a very Western lifestyle. But if you published a pamphlet criticizing the Shah, or if you tried to organize an independent labor union, SAVAK would kick your door down in the middle of the night.
It was a very dark underbelly. And while the Shah is using SAVAK to secure his political legitimacy, he is simultaneously fighting a deeply agonizing private battle for dynastic legitimacy.
Because he needs a son.
The entire purpose of a royal family, the fundamental mechanic of a monarchy, is to secure the succession. You need an heir. But the Pahlavis were trapped by a very specific, inherited legal hurdle.
Right, the Constitution of 1906.
Exactly. When the previous dynasty, the Qajars, ratified the 1906 Constitution during the Constitutional Revolution, they wrote in a very specific self-preservation clause.
What did it say?
Articles 36 and 38 dictated that the crown of Persia could only pass to a male heir whose mother was of Persian origin, and crucially, an heir who did not have Qajar blood.
Oh, wow.
They did this to ensure no rival family could marry into the line. But when the parliament amended the constitution in 1925 to install Reza Shah, they left that no Qajar blood rule firmly in place.
And this creates a logistical and emotional nightmare for the new Pahlavi dynasty, because Reza Shah had married multiple women, some of whom had Qajar lineage to help secure his early alliances, right?
Exactly. Mohammad Reza had several half-brothers, but because their mothers had Qajar blood, they were constitutionally barred from ever inheriting the throne.
So who was left?
Mohammad Reza had only one full brother who was eligible to succeed him, Prince Ali Reza. But tragically, in 1954, just a year after the Shah regained his throne, Prince Ali Reza dies in an airplane crash in the Alborz Mountains.
Suddenly, the Shah has no eligible brothers.
None. If he dies, the Pahlavi dynasty legally ceases to exist. Producing a male heir is no longer just a family expectation. It becomes an existential crisis for the state apparatus.
And this intense pressure literally destroys his personal life.
It really does. His first marriage was to Princess Fawzia of Egypt, the sister of King Farouk.
A big diplomatic union.
A brilliant diplomatic union that connected the newly minted, self-made Pahlavis to the ancient, prestigious Muhammad Ali dynasty of Egypt. They had a daughter, Princess Shahnaz, but no son.
And under immense dynastic pressure and cultural isolation, the marriage collapses and they divorce in 1948.
His second marriage is perhaps the most tragic. In 1951, he marries Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari. By all accounts in our sources, this was a deep, genuine, and passionate love match.
It truly was. But after years of marriage and consultations with top medical experts around the world, it became painfully clear that Queen Soraya could not have children.
The Shah was heartbroken. He loved her deeply, but the state machinery, the constitution, and his own advisors demanded a male heir.
He was trapped.
Completely. He agonized over the decision, reportedly exploring options to change the constitution or take a second wife, which Soraya refused. In 1958, he tearfully announces their divorce, simply because she cannot provide the son the state requires.
It highlights the immense, almost inhuman psychological weight placed on the individuals trapped inside this institutional machinery.
Finally, in 1959, he marries Farah Diba, a young, intelligent Iranian architecture student who had been studying in Paris. And in 1960, the existential crisis is finally mercifully resolved when she gives birth to Crown Prince Reza.
With the succession finally secure, the Shah feels confident enough to formally crown himself.
Which is crazy considering how long he'd been in power.
Right. Remember, he had been Shah since 1941, but he famously refused to hold a coronation until he felt he had brought sufficient prosperity to Iran and secured the dynasty's future.
So in 1967, a lavish, incredibly ornate coronation is finally held in Tehran. And in a highly symbolic, precedent-shattering move, he crowns Farah as Shahbanu, or Empress.
She is the first woman to be crowned in Iranian history.
Signaling the regime's commitment to women's rights as part of the White Revolution narrative. But the 1967 coronation was just the warm-up act.
Oh yeah, the big one is coming.
In 1971, the Shah decides to throw what is essentially the mother of all historical parties. He wants to prove, once and for all, to his own people and to the global elite, that the Pahlavis aren't just a 50-year-old military experiment.
He wants to prove they are the rightful, undeniable heirs to Iranian history. So he organizes the 2,500-year celebration of the founding of the Persian Empire by Cyrus the Great.
They hold it in the desert at the ancient ruins of Persepolis. It is a spectacle almost beyond comprehension.
Paint a picture for us because the details are insane.
Dozens of kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers from around the world are flown in. The logistics are staggering. Because there is no infrastructure at the ruins, they build a luxurious tent city designed by elite French decorators.
Out in the middle of nowhere.
Literally in the desert. They fly in food directly from Maxim's in Paris. They serve thousands of bottles of vintage wine and Baccarat crystal. And for entertainment, they stage massive parades of Iranian soldiers dressed in meticulously historically accurate uniforms of empires spanning 2.5 millennia, marching past the ruins.
And I have to say, looking at the political reality on the ground in 1971, this event was a disastrous misstep.
You think it was a mistake?
Oh, totally. It was exorbitantly expensive. Estimates vary wildly from $20 million to over $100 million. And this is happening at a time when many rural Iranians, despite the White Revolution, are still living in profound poverty, lacking basic electricity or paved roads.
That is a harsh contrast.
It was a completely out-of-touch, tone-deaf party for the global elite. The domestic population was completely excluded. They just watched it on television. It acted as the swan song of the dynasty, fundamentally alienating a struggling population who watched their monarch spend a fortune to play dress-up with ancient ghosts.
I see exactly why you view it that way, and certainly the opposition used it as powerful propaganda. But from a dynastic perspective, I argue it was a necessary and even brilliant piece of symbolic theater.
Really? Brilliant.
Yes. Remember the psychological weight of 1941 and 1953? The Shah was fighting a constant, exhausting battle against the perception that he was a modern anomaly, a Western puppet installed yesterday.
Right.
He had to visually and undeniably connect his modern rule to Cyrus the Great. by forcing the leaders of the entire world to come to Persepolis and pay homage to him among the ruins of the Achaemenids. He was demanding global recognition that the Pahlavi name was the legitimate continuation of the greatest empire in history. He was securing his son's future on the global stage.
Well, whether it was brilliant theater or a tone-deaf disaster, the applause didn't last long. The bill for that party, both financially and politically, comes due. We are moving into the final phase, the decline. A dynasty undone by its own contradictions. The 1970s bring massive geopolitical shifts. The Shah, feeling deeply emboldened by his secure succession, the success of Persepolis, and his rapidly growing modern military, starts to act much more independently on the world stage.
He becomes a leading, aggressive voice in OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. He pushes hard for massive increases in the price of oil, leading to the 1973 oil crisis.
This is a crucial pivot point. For decades, the West, particularly the United States, supported him unconditionally because he was their reliable anti-communist anchor in the Middle East. They sold him whatever weapons he wanted.
But in the 70s, the Shah starts aggressively pursuing nuclear energy technology, negotiating deals with France. He negotiates independent, cheap oil deals with Japan.
He's going rogue from the U.S. perspective.
Exactly. He is using the massive influx of oil wealth to build up his military to the point where he considers Iran the undisputed independent superpower of the Persian Gulf.
And this growing independence makes the United States incredibly nervous. The very power that helped restore him in 1953 is now looking at a monarch who is dictating global energy prices, causing inflation in the West, and refusing to be a compliant, quiet client state.
So the relationship cools.
It does. And when the internal unrest really starts to boil over in 1977 and 1978, the Shah finds that his traditional geopolitical safety net has evaporated.
They aren't there to catch him this time.
No. The West, grappling with their own economic crises caused in part by the Shah's oil shocks, and with a new human rights-focused administration in Washington under Jimmy Carter, begins to withdraw its unconditional, unquestioning support.
And internally, the situation is unraveling at an unprecedented speed. A massive, incredibly diverse coalition forms against the Shah.
Now, based on our sources, again, keeping an impartial lens here, the 1978-1979 revolution is a unique historical event. It isn't just a communist uprising, and it isn't just a religious crusade.
No, it is an impossible coalition.
Right. You have Marxist student groups, secular democratic reformers who have been tortured by Savak for decades, and traditional religious fundamentalists, all uniting under the spiritual and political leadership of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who was directing the movement via smuggled cassette tapes from exile in France.
If you are listening and wondering how a secular Marxist university student and a deeply conservative Islamic cleric end up holding the exact same protest sign, you have to look at what the Pahlavis actually built.
Right, the irony of it all.
This is the great, tragic irony of the Pahlavi decline. Look at what they accomplished. Reza Shah and Mohammad Reza forced the modernization of Iran. They built massive universities. They industrialized the economy. They created a massive, educated urban middle class and a vast bureaucratic intelligentsia.
But by completely denying that new, highly educated class any meaningful political freedom, by shutting down independent newspapers, outlawing rival political parties, and relying on the secret police to maintain absolute monarchical control, the Shah managed to do the impossible.
He united them against him.
Yes. He united his own secular creations, the students, the engineers, the doctors he had educated, with the traditional conservative religious clerics who had hated the Pahlavis ever since Reza Shah banned the veil and fired machine guns at the shrine in 1936.
By outlawing all legal political avenues, the only place left to organize resistance was the mosque. He gave two diametrically opposed groups a single, unifying common enemy: himself.
As 1978 progresses, the protests grow from thousands to millions. The turning point is the economy. The massive strikes begin, particularly by the oil workers in the South.
When the oil workers strike, the lifeblood of the regime stops flowing. The economy grinds to a complete halt.
And at the exact moment he needs to be decisive, the Shah is secretly battling advanced terminal lymphoma,
Which nobody knew about.
The medication and the psychological stress cause him to severely vacillate. One day he orders violent military crackdowns that leave dozens dead in the streets, and the next day he goes on television, apologizes, and offers sudden, desperate concessions.
Well, the vacillation projects weakness.
In January 1979, as his control evaporates entirely, he tries one last desperate maneuver. He appoints a longtime political opponent, a secular social democrat named Shapur Bakhtiar, to the position of prime minister.
Bakhtiar had spent years in the Shah's prisons.
The Shah hopes that appointing him will appease the secular revolutionaries and split the coalition. And then, on January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, weeping, boards a Boeing 707, takes the controls himself and flies out of Iran, supposedly for a vacation.
He will never return.
The monarchy collapses within weeks of his departure. The government of Bakhtiar is completely overwhelmed as the Iranian military, seeing the millions in the streets, officially declares neutrality and returns to its barracks.
Ayatollah Khomeini returns to Tehran to massive, ecstatic crowds, and the Islamic Republic is rapidly established, completely replacing the 54-year-old Pahlavi state.
The Shah lives the last 18 months of his life as a tragic figure, a dying man without a country.
Because of his controversial status, he is shuttled from Egypt to Morocco to the Bahamas to Mexico.
He is briefly admitted to the United States for emergency cancer treatment, which directly triggers the storming of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and the hostage crisis, before he is finally forced to leave again.
He returns to Egypt, the only country willing to grant him permanent asylum, where he dies of cancer in July 1980. He is given a state funeral by Anwar Sadat and buried in Cairo.
But the Pahlavi story doesn't entirely end in that Cairo mosque in 1980. The dynastic structure, the family, remains. The current head of the house is Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi II, who has lived in exile in the United States for decades, advocating for a secular democracy in Iran.
And the family structure continues, with Reza Pahlavi declaring his eldest daughter, Noor Pahlavi, as his heir.
And as we see in modern news reports, the legacy of this dynasty continues to echo loudly in the streets of Iran today. During recent protests, you occasionally hear slogans referencing the Pahlavi name chanted by young people who were born decades after the Shah died.
It proves that the 54 years of Pahlavi rule, the modernization, the brutality, the secularism, the wealth, and the nationalism remain a deeply complicated, highly divisive, and intensely powerful memory in the modern Iranian consciousness.
The historical debate over their ultimate legacy, whether they were visionary modernizers or brutal dictators, is far from settled.
It really isn't.
So what does this all mean? We started by looking at a common soldier who literally willed a dynasty into existence from the ashes of a fractured empire by taxing sugar and crushing warlords.
Right.
We watched his son try to buy the love of his people and the respect of the world with rapid modernization, land reform, and ancient billion-dollar pageantry at Persepolis.
And we watched it all collapse in a matter of months when the cultural fabric of the nation simply tore apart under the strain of holding up a modern economy and a medieval autocracy at the same time.
It means that you can build the longest, most impressive railways. You can mandate the clothes people wear, you can dictate the laws of the land, build the largest military in the region, and you can even successfully enforce an ancient mythological name upon a modern state.
But you cannot dictate a nation's soul by royal decree.
That brings us back to our opening thought. We asked you to imagine being the soldier who decides to become king. But here's one final thought for you to take away, something to mull over long after you finish listening to our deep dive today.
The Pahlavis obsessed for over half a century over forging a unified, modern, politically aware, nationalist Iranian identity to replace a fractured, tribal, and divided past.
Right.
Looking at the millions of people who poured into the streets in 1978 and 1979, well, actually, think about this. Did the Pahlavis actually succeed in creating that unified, modern Iranian identity? Only to find that this new, politically conscious identity was exactly what gave the people the unity and strength to overthrow their kings.
A fascinating question to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Pahlavi dynasty.